Morning, everybody. I just saw some comments to the shortened version I did with regard to comparing the two FOIs, 2018 and 2023, and the Thirlwall document, which is a listing of all the deaths of interest. We could put it as a phrase like that. And that kind of gave me the encouragement just to do this final thought, really. Well, not final, but this additional thought that is it possible that there were up to 24, if not more, quote unquote, deaths of interest across 2015, 2016, both in CoCH and a certain number, we don't know how many, post-transfer, but related to the care that the babies, the neonates received in CoCH. So where do I get the 24 figure from? 17 on the 2018 FOI. There are obviously two missing, at least two missing, but there certainly are two missing, which is August and October 2015. We know that because they end up as convictions on the indictment. So that's 19. And then Thirlwall brings them in, and quite rightly so. There are four, they mentioned four post-transfer deaths, i.e. in level 3 units, one of them being baby K. We know it's right to bring them in. For example, why is it right to bring them in? Because they're including baby K. So baby K was originally a murder charge, which they dropped, and then ends up being a conviction for attempted murder. That's why it's right to bring them in, all the post-transfer deaths. So they say, Thirlwall, they're saying there are four across those 2 years. They don't say 2 years up to August, do they? They say 2 years at the beginning of that document. They just say the years. They just mention the years. What happened to the August 2016 death? Where did it go? Why would it have been put in there randomly and then just disappeared? Why would that have happened? And that's a late neonatal death. I don't understand it. Absent an explanation, I don't know how we can get one. They're not going to tell us. I don't think they will tell us. Absent an explanation as to why there were so many deaths listed more. Essentially there are six deaths difference between the 2018 FOI and the 2023 FOI, which was, they did that on this so-called manual count, whatever manual count means. Why would the manual count have shown that people had made up deaths in a previous FOI? I don't get that. There needs to be an explanation as to why those other deaths were there. Otherwise, I'm taking them as read that they were there. But where did they happen? Did they happen at CoCH? Were they further post-transfer deaths that in the 2023 FOI they took off? So just to remind us, we've got 17 showing on the 2018 FOI, but it should be 19 because they miss out the 2 that's from the indictment. It goes down to only 13 showing on the 2023 FOI. That 13 figure matches with the deaths on the Thirlwall document, but the Thirlwall document adds another 4 post-transfer deaths and a death in the maternity. But as I was saying before, all but one of them do not match with the months of the extra deaths showing in the earlier FOI. So in other words, it's not them. It's not that in the later FOI they missed out the post-transfer deaths, whereas they had put them in the earlier one. I mean, it's possible that there's one that matches, but I don't see why you would match one and not all of them. So I think they're separate. In other words, I'm saying I don't think, as far as we can tell, it is guesswork because they're not giving us the reasons and the explanations. I don't think the difference in the number of deaths between the 2018 FOI and the 2023 FOI, which is 6 in number, I don't think what accounts for that are any of the extra information that the Thirlwall document gives us in terms of post-transfer deaths and the death in the maternity ward, because all except one does. The months don't match. The months don't match because we're given the months. We're given the months for the post-transfer deaths in the Thirlwall documents and the other death in the maternity ward. So that's the takeaway at the moment. Personally, I don't know how, I mean, that makes a huge difference. Why am I making this video? Because it just brings it back onto the page again. It brings it back into view again. I think that there's potentially a far greater amount of deaths of interest, as it were, across those 2 years, which means that the number of deaths that Lucy Letby was charged with is a much smaller relative proportion than we had thought. If it was the case, and I know it's an if it was the case that there are a total of at least 24 deaths of interest, which includes some being post-transfer, we don't know how many. Is it possible that some of those extra ones that they lost between the two FOIs were also post-transfer, but for some reason they didn't get their way onto the Thirlwall document looking at post-transfer deaths for whatever reason? There's something gone missing. There's something gone missing there, or we're expected to believe someone completed an FOI based on the data that they had at the time in 2018, and they added 6 extra deaths there for no reason whatsoever. Does that sound likely? If it is likely, if that level of discrepancy is likely, then how can we trust any of the data at all later on? So that's the sort of cleft foot we're in, sort of, or that's not the phrase, that's the kind of dilemma we're in here, the bind we're in to try to understand this. But if we knew there were 24 deaths of interest, including post-transfer deaths, but where the care at the CoCH is implicated in those eventual deaths at a level 3 unit, and Lucy Letby has been charged with 7 murders. So what happens there? That's like 17 deaths. 17 deaths of interest in total that they've got to explain. So we've got the old description of what we were talking about since very early on after the convictions, which is, hold on a minute, they've got a spike and a serial killer. They've got a serial killer and then they've got to explain a spike at the same time. Now, what's more likely is that you've actually got a really big spike. And you don't need a serial killer story because you've got to explain the spike as well, separate from that. But the reality is they've got a very, very big spike. Is it up to 24 babies of deaths of interest? I'm not saying they all happened at CoCH. They're telling us 4 did not. And then obviously there's the whole story of stillbirths as well, which is another thing that is up in the air in terms of, well, how many of those are early neonatal deaths? So it could be more than 24. We just don't know. But there are hints that there could be many more deaths overall that you should include as in the overall picture of what happened across those 2 full years in CoCH. And we can see very clearly that the August 2016 death in the 2018 FOI is missed out in the Thirlwall document of lists of deaths. We can see that's missed out. It's just not there because they're not interested in the full year of 2016. They're only interested until Lucy Letby leaves, and then it's a giveaway again as to what the whole direction is, which is exactly what the police only looked at, or the NHS, Countess of Chester, have got to explain, just in that one example, why they put that August 2016 death in there. Was it just made it up? Just made it up? And all the other ones. So that's the kind of headline of this video, in the sense is, were there up to 24 deaths, if not potentially even more, of interest across the 2 full years of 2015 and 2016, from which Lucy Letby was charged and sadly and wrongly convicted of 7, leaving a further 17 to explain, actually, as to what was going on there. But clearly it's about explaining the full amount, because there were no murders and there is no serial killer, but they've got to explain the larger amount. So I'll leave it there. I feel it's not a rabbit hole, it's a question that hasn't been answered, and it doesn't make sense to me. I can't blithely let go of that 2018 FOI without a reason to let it go fully. Other than, I can't just accept the NHS will say, oh yeah, we just counted again, and we got 6 deaths out, and we missed deaths out in the early one that were on the indictment. It couldn't have been that bad. There must be something of veracity in that 2018 that they've altered. Not that they found it to be wrong, but they've altered. That's what I suspect. At the very least, I suspect that something isn't right about it, or well, I was going to say, or explain it to us, but they're not going to explain it to us. Could you do an FOI to say, can you explain why there's that disparity? In other words, why? You'd have to go into each one of them, and then what they're going to say? Well, no, it was just incorrect. But I don't believe that. I'm sorry, I just don't believe it was just simply people putting in essentially random figures for up to 6 deaths that then magically don't disappear. They disappear. And to remember, 2018 is nearer the time than 2023, isn't it? So we're also being asked to believe that, and this just sort of is a parallel to what happens to the memories of the consultants, is that their memories get better over time. We know that, don't we? Their memories get better the further away something happens, which is counter to what happens in reality. And we're also now we're expected to believe that the FOIs get more accurate the further away it is from the time that it happened. In other words, the 2023 FOI that's the real thing. That's more accurate than one that happened within a couple of years of these events. Anyway, I'll leave it there, and thank you so much for bearing with me, because I'm just really stuck on this, and I just don't feel that letting that 2018 FOI go, as I know they want us to, but it's meaningful. If that was the headline, 24 deaths, only seven convictions, they've got to explain that very large number of deaths that happened in the unit or were potentially a consequence of what happened in the unit at a level 3 unit or post-transfer. Anyway, don't want to keep repeating it, but thank you so much for listening, and have a great day there. All the best. Bye.